was just my imagination.
Imaginary is directed by Jeff Wadlow, and it's the newest Blumhouse horror movie to hit theaters. And Blumhouse has always been a bit of a mixed bag for me personally, because sometimes I watch movies like Fantasy Island, and I think, how is this horrible garbage trash of a movie ever made? But other times you get incredible horror movies like The Black Phone, and I want more of those, so I keep going back to Blumhouse for more. And earlier this year, we already got a movie called Night Swim that dropped in January. And while January is the place where our studios dump movies to die, I had hoped that that was going to be a good time, and it was fine. It wasn't the best Blumhouse movie, wasn't the worst, somewhere in the middle, but again, Blumhouse is a bit of a mixed bag. So when I heard there was a movie called Imaginary coming out, where it played on your imagination as a child, I thought, well, that's an interesting concept, something I haven't seen done before. Then Blumhouse announced that it was going to release in March, kind of getting out of that dead zone of early winter, January, February movies. I thought, this could be really good. So I went and saw Imaginary this past weekend, and I was wrong. But let's get into my review. We'll start with the synopsis. Essentially, this movie starts with a family of four, a mother, father, and their two daughters, and they're living in an apartment building. And this apartment building has gotten a little too small for them, so they decide they are going to move into the mom's childhood home. Now, the mom hasn't been to her childhood home in many years because of some tragic event that happened in her past, and so she hasn't been back to the house since then. In fact, the night that that tragic event happened, she was taken by the state, and her father was put in a mental institution. Now, who was paying the taxes on the house and who was keeping the house kind of clean? I have no idea. The movie never says, but it doesn't explain a lot. But with that said, they move into that house and they start settling in. But then the entity that's living in the basement starts playing on the imagination of the people living in the house, specifically the little girl. The little girl finds the thing in the basement in the shape of a teddy bear, and she thinks, hey, this is my new friend. And so she picks up the teddy bear, and she now has an imaginary friend that only some people can see when the movie decides they wanted to see. Anyway, with that said, if that sounds like a good synopsis to you, you can go check this movie out in theaters. It is a horror movie, so for those of you who are horror fans, if you're a big fan of jump scares, this movie might work for you. I don't recommend it, and I'll get into my reasons why right now. You know what? Let's just do it. I'm going to say it right now. Listen, I'm going to give you one positive, and then I'm going to get into some negatives, and those negatives are going to be heavy spoilers. So I already titled this video Imaginary Spoiler Review, but just to be clear, it's just because the negatives in this movie are so egregious that I don't want to have anybody else waste their time on this movie. So my one quick positive to this movie is that it's a cool concept. It really is. I thought the idea of playing on the imagination of the characters in the movie might even translate to the people watching, so that you could see what they're seeing in their imagination, but then subvert expectations for the audience. Like, I thought that could be a really cool concept. But to be clear, that's the only positive I have, because after that concept, it's poorly executed the rest of the way. So we'll get into my negatives right now. My first negative actually plays off of that original positive that I had, the concept, the poor execution of that concept. The idea that you could be watching the imagination of these characters throughout the movie is a really cool concept. And I personally am one that really appreciates when a movie, a horror movie, can play on the imagination of the viewer the entire time. Like, for me personally, when a horror movie shows you the final reveal of the entity, the ghost, the witch, the goblin, you get the idea. When it shows you that, it ceases to be scary. At least for me. Like, it's scary up until a point. When I was a kid, maybe it was a little scarier because maybe the theme was grotesque or monstrous. But when you're an adult, it's just not scary once they reveal that. So really, your imagination is what fuels the horror movie, at least for me. I don't know if that's like that for everybody else, but that's me. Like, until they show that thing. Then when they show that thing, it's like, okay, well, let's hope you wrap this movie up well. Thanks for waiting to the last act to finally show the thing fully, because until then, it was just my imagination on this thing, and my imagination can get me kind of scared. So I had hoped they were going to do something like that with this movie, but instead, what this movie does is it shows you the monster entity reveal in the first scene of the movie. There's a dream sequence at the beginning of this movie, and the very first scene, they reveal the monster. And for me personally, I'm not saying this is going to be like this for everybody, but that just took me out of it completely, because now any horror element, whatever this thing's going to look like throughout the movie, whether it's going to shapeshift and kind of look like different things, jump scare people, no matter what's going to happen, I know what it's going to look like in the very end of this movie. And sure enough, you get to the last 30 minutes and it looks like it did at the opening scene of this movie. So for me, the horror element was gone immediately, because in a movie called Imaginary, I had no imagination. Like, for me, watching this movie, I was like, I know what this thing's gonna look like. And that was a huge letdown. Set the tone for the entire movie for me. Let's move on to my next negative. Next negative I have is the exposition dump character known as Old Lady.
And Old Lady.
That's right. This old lady character is a character that comes in kind of a creepy scene, kind of a well-done scene, kind of reminded me of something out of a James Wan movie. This teenage girl goes to take a picture of herself, like a selfie, in the window, and when she snaps it, she realizes there's something standing on the lawn watching her, and that's a cool concept, and again, could be done really well, but immediately you find out that she's the old lady next door, and then you find out that she's there to just exposition dump on the audience. Like, oh, I was there that fateful night when you were taken away. And then you find out everything that happened that night through her. And you find out what's going on with that house through her. You find out what that entity is through her. And they just keep bringing her in at random moments. Like, they'll do a bunch of jump scares, and then they'll bring this old lady in to dump on the audience, and then they'll do a bunch of jump scares, and then she'll come in and talk to the audience. And that's how this movie goes, all the way up to the end, where, again, I told you there's going to be spoilers. But again, they get to imaginary land, and when they get there, the old lady's like, this was my plan all along. I planned to get you guys here. And then immediately she's killed. Immediately. So that's my next negative, is that old lady character was one of the worst thought out characters and just a terrible way to give the audience information. Like, there's nothing wrong with, hey, we got to go talk, do this seance, and oh, we're going to see what happens. Like, okay, that's fine. That's a quick way to give the audience a little bit of information. But when you use this one character to dump so much information on the audience, it just doesn't work for me. My next negative for this movie is going to be the writing. Some of the dialogue between characters is just grating, especially between the mother and the father in this movie. Like, they're living in this house and he's got to go on tour, and he's like, hey, babe, I got to go on tour. And it's just like a way to stop paying that actor to get him out of the house. So now it's just the mom and the daughter's home alone. That's pretty rough. And then you've got the mom and her dad, and he's in a mental institution and can barely talk, but when he does talk, their conversations with each other just, they're rough. They're really rough. On top of that, this mom is like a world-renowned published children's book author, and so she's reading her books to the dad in his bed, and what she's reading just sounds like the dumbest shit I've ever heard. Like, it is incredibly stupid. Not like, oh, we had to dumb it down for kids. Like, it's just dumb shit that somebody plugged into an AI machine. They were like, this sounds like a children's book. Put that in the script. That's legitimately what it felt like. My final negative for this movie is going to be how many multiple endings there were. And listen, multiple endings can have their place. Typically at the end of a trilogy, looking at you, Lord of the Rings, looking at you, The Dark Knight Rises. But in this movie, in a one-off horror movie, multiple endings don't work. And that is what we got here. And it just prolonged this movie. For a movie that was only an hour and a half, it felt so long because the movie almost did something kind of cool at the end. I've spoiled so many other things, I'm just going to say it. So the movie ends with her realizing she never escaped imaginary land. Like, she has this whole scene where she escapes the entity, she makes it out, and she's dressed all nice, and her kids are dressed nice, and her husband's there, and they're like, hey, let's all go to see dad in the hospital, and he wakes up, and he's talking to them, and you're like, this is great. And then she realizes she's still in imaginary land. And I thought in that moment, maybe some of this movie would have been salvageable, because I appreciate when there's like a dark ending. Like, I like when movies can do that. And in this movie, they see that, and I don't know if a producer saw it and was like, no, we cannot have a dark ending. You better get her out of imaginary land, but then leave the door open so that we could do a sequel, because that's exactly what they do. They go back and they redo the entire ending. She makes it out of imaginary land, and then you see that damn teddy bear at the end, and you're like, oh, no, they're really trying to leave the door open for a sequel to this movie. My God, it's like in Night Swim where they covered the pool with dirt instead of cement, because they're like, but if we can do a sequel, then like water can get through the dirt and then you get at this wishing well again. And in this movie, it's like, but if we can do a sequel, somebody else has a teddy bear now and we'll follow that family. It'll be different. It'll be new. But it won't be. It was just terrible. My overall thoughts on this movie, guys, are that if you think about this movie for too long, it will start to melt your brain, because there is plot hole after plot hole after plot hole, including the damn teddy bear, which is on the poster and in all the marketing. And I'm just going to tell you why. The teddy bear turns out to be the imaginary friend. Nobody can actually see the teddy bear except for the little girl and the mom, because the entity was secretly after the mom the entire time, because she's the little girl that got away from the beginning of the movie. So now the entity is after them and nobody else can see it. And you're supposed to like have this mind-blowing moment at that time. You're like, oh my God. But when you sit and think about it for any amount of time, you're like, wait a minute. That bear interacted with like 6 other people throughout the movie, including up to the very end where a little boy has a teddy bear and he shows them to the family and the family's like, we all saw it. So they're like, oh, it can't be the imaginary. And then it morphs into the imaginary bear. So the movie, again, if you think about it for too long, it'll melt your brain. But those are just my thoughts because that's my review for Imaginary. Guys, if you had a chance to see Imaginary, if you have, let me know in the comment section down below if we agree or disagree on anything that I said. Maybe you got something out of it that I didn't, or maybe you had even more problems. I would love to know in the comment section down below. And this review was a little different where I went directly into spoilers just because it's just so grating and so irritating that movies like this get made. But with that said, if you like this video and you want to watch more, don't forget to hit the like button because it helps the video, it helps the channel, and it helps me right here. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time. All right, guys, we got to the end of the Imaginary review, and I don't know if Blumhouse has anything else coming out this year, but I am not excited about it. And I'll be honest, I'm not very excited for horror this year. I'm looking forward to Maxine whenever we get that. I think it's got like a June release date. And I think there's that Dracula's Daughter movie that I don't remember the name of right now. But whenever that comes out. But like in the next month, we have 2 Nun movies coming out. One, the Omen, the Origin of Omen or something. And then we get Immaculate with Sydney Sweeney. And they look like the same movie. They legitimately look like the same movie. If you watch those trailers without the title cards, you'd be hard-pressed to figure out which one was Immaculate and which one was Omen. It's just, that's what we're getting right now. So I'm hoping horror turns around this year. So far, it has not been a good year for horror. But with that said, if you want to watch any of my other horror reviews, I've got all of my horror movie reviews right there. And I've got all of my 2024 movie reviews right there.